Hello everyone. This is for UG second year comparative politics class. Today I am going to take a class on evolution of the European nation state system, which is all of your unit 4. I will be beginning the course. Uh, uh, Let me tell you, in the beginning of your syllabus, it is mentioned that nation state system and nation and states. So when we try to understand the idea of a nation and the difference between nation and state, it is very clear that both of them are not um, same concept, because nation is something which is psychological, nation is something which appeals to your emotions, and state is something which is legal, state is something which forces you to accept that you are part of a state system, and you have to be a citizen of one country. So I mean, the idea of a nation and the idea of a state, uh, they are different in the sense that states are more into the legal system, whereas a nation is something which is deeply psychological, it is deeply political, and also nation is something where you appeal to your emotions. So that's why nation and states are two different concepts. We will try to explain these terms further when we try to understand the evolution of modern European nation system, how they are different. So friends, when we try to begin with the modern European nation state system, we have to keep it in mind that nation state system, it's just like that Rome was not built in a day. Similarly, the nation state system today, what we see is also a product of gradual reforms. I mean, it started with certain notes, and then gradually there were improvements, and today what we see are a gradual, it's a product of gradual reforms process. So that's why today I would like to give a lecture which will be around 35 to 40 minutes. It will be on the nation state system and how that has evolved in modern Europe. So we are using the PowerPoint presentation, and I hope all of you will look at the slides that I have prepared for all of you. Kindly look at the slides. See, when we try to understand the evolution of European nation state system, see, we have to understand that many ancient civilizations, it actually existed before European nation states emerged. For example, we see China, India, Japan, they were all ancient civilizations, but there is a big difference between what we call as modern nation states and ancient civilizations. I'll tell you why they're two different concepts. But what actually defined the significance of these important ancient civilizations was their defined trade relations. Trade relations, it was significant because if you take the case of India, at least India had significant amount of trade relations with many of the advanced Western countries at that point of time. And India was a materially very efficient and productive country at that point of time. So ancient trade relations defined their relations. So war making ability was clearly defining the feature of these civilizations. See, we have to understand that what actually defined these ancient civilizations were their ability to acquire new territories. And how they could acquire new territories, it is through their ability to pursue war relentlessly. So war making ability was clearly the defining feature of these kind of ancient civilizations. And also we have to remember the military power. The civilization which had more and more military power, they were significant at that point of time. So war making and military power formed the very basis of the empire system. And one of the empires which survived for longest period of time is the Chinese Empire. So when the war making ability declined, the imperial system disintegrated. Anthony Giddens, one of the famous social scientists, is of the view that the deployment of military strength was most important in the creation and preservation of the frontier or territorial boundaries, though these boundaries were later often inflexed and shifted according to patterns of alliances, rebellion, and invasion. What it means is that, military strength defined the significance of nation states, the ancient civilizations at that point of time. I mean, the preservation of their territorial integrity was dependent on how much military power I had at that point of time. That's why it was very, very important. And what was important? So these are some of the features of the empire system, which I'm telling you right now. The economic requirement of these empires was met through tributes of those vanquished in the war or who accepted the rule of the victor. Tributes were necessary to support the administration. Let me tell you why tributes. I'm using the word tributes. Tributes is basically a concept which is used in reverse system. But here, what it means is a kind of support system that these conquered territories will add to the empires. So they will be. That is why they are considered as tributes. So empires were ruled, but they were not governed. So intermarriage, cultural and religious assimilation were some of the methods employed to facilitate integration and proliferate the reach of the emperors. And again, the importance of military force, which I have consistently said that these were the cardinal features of the empire system. Spread of military power and political power was uneven. There was more political control over the territories which were connected to main roads, rivers, and unevenness was greater when there was lack of communication and accessibility. This was going to happen because military power and political power have limitations when you have geographical disadvantages. For example, you don't have any communication system. We don't have any accessibility to those land. So naturally, they will suffer. So that's why the spread of military power and political power is uneven because of the fact that all places which were conquered at that point of time, they did not have the same kind of communication and access to the mighty empires. So because there was a communication problem, even if the land was conquered, there was a further loss of territories because it could not be preserved further. Why it could not be preserved? Because there was no question of continuing the military presence because of the inaccessibility of the land itself. So lack of control encouraged local hostility among the local elites in the periphery. And this resulted into scattered boundaries which experienced changes over a period of time. And this actually marked the beginning of medieval age, where the focus was more on the European land mass. And in this phase, there arose some major powers. Friends, these powers were very, very significant at that point of time. For example, the Kingdom of France, the Germanic Empire, the Principality of Poland. So these power centers emerged in the medieval period of Europe. I'm not speaking about Britain. I'm speaking about France, Germany, and Poland. So these power blocks conquered areas through military conquests and extraction of tributes, rents, and governing demarcated boundaries were a remarkable feature of this time. So at that point of time, what was important was the extraction of tributes, rents, and governing demarcated boundaries. So these were the kind of works that they used to do during that point of time. So some kind of political order was also visible during that time. So remember, when we speak about the European state system, so it actually began from the time when, I would say that from the medieval period, actually we could see some kind of political formation in medieval Europe, because the nation states or the would-be nation states, they were trying to consolidate their position in European societies, and they were trying to emerge as a unified territory within that European system. So a network of rule fragmented into many small autonomous parts developed during this time. So a network of rule fragmented into small autonomous parts developed during this time, because rules were necessary to, I would say that they were necessary to govern the areas. So rules also gradually emerged for better administration. However, territorial rule and sovereign claim was actually absent, and war was still the order of the day. Remember, war was still the order of the day. That means war, like the previous period where war and military power used to define the characteristics of a political system, or I can say ancient political system, here war was still the order of the day. This period also saw the rise of urban centers and cities with several principalities, duchies, kingdom, and other power centers. So this period also witnessed diverse claims to political authority and the rise of numerous urban centers, like the Italian city center is a prime example. So, Italy is considered as a prime example where the political, different contesting political voices, they could actually try to project themselves for capturing power in that particular city. So, what was another significant thing during that period of time was religion, because it was considered as another important factor at that period of time. Remember, please go back, this is I have not written here, but please go back to the modernity period and immediately the period before modernity, where entire England was controlled mostly by the religious authorities. So religion was another important factor at that point of time. I'm speaking about the medieval period, medieval world history and the European history. So Europe actually started experiencing a nation state in the making with shared historical experiences, culture, religion, and language. So later on, state came to be seen as a functional and organizational body with characteristics of a modern state. So thus a point is reached where we can see the development of a modern state with the arrival of a period of absolutism and emergence of interstate system. See, remember, we are not speaking about the kind of nation state system that we are witnessing today. I am speaking about a nation state system which was absolute in character. So I'll also tell you there are also other kind of nation state system and the princely state system that actually emerged in Western Europe. But the question that we try to address here is that the development of modern state, I mean, how it was linked to the idea of absolutism and emergence of interstate system. So these are the two key questions that we try to respond. So some important developments during this time: conflict among the monarchs, princes, barons over rightful authority, rebellion of the peasant against the exploitative taxes, flourishing trade and commerce, renaissance in culture with a renewed interest in classical political ideas, and consolidation of the national monarchies. So this is where we find something interesting happening. Come back to the next point. This medieval period also saw some kind of challenge to the authority of the church and the nature of the church itself, because people began to question church as a political authority. They were ready to accept church as a religious authority, but they were not ready to accept church as a political authority, and that's why they began to question the political decisions being taken by the Pope. So challenges to the supremacy of the church and rivalry between monarch and church. The monarch was considered as the political head of the state system, whereas the church was not ready to accept that. So there was a conflict between the church and the monarch with regard to who is supreme in the case of, I would say, controlling the nation state system. So two forms of monarchical system emerged at that point of time. Absolute monarchies, you might be knowing that Sweden, Spain, Russia, and constitutional monarchies like Britain and Holland. So we had two models of nation states which actually emerged at that point of time. So the process of state making, which began to minimize the socio-economic and cultural differences within a state, was the achievement of this process, expansion of differences, which helped to forge political community with a sense of identity. So, state making was gradually becoming easier because, first of all, we see that war making was important. Then we see that some rules were introduced to the nation states just to ensure that people are in peace. And then we see that different kind of monarchies are emerging. And then the process of also state making was necessary to minimize the socio-economic and cultural differences within a state. And all of us know that we must need some kind of super constitutional body like a state to monitor these kind of socio-economic and cultural differences, right? So that's why nation state system actually it became very, very important. So by 17th century, society of states in Europe were based on the principles of sovereignty and territoriality. So state sovereignty was the central concern, which meant that the state granted each other rights of jurisdiction in their respective territories and communities. So the Treaty of Westphalia can be seen as the most important development in this direction. Please remember, Treaty of Westphalia is the single most important document whenever we try to begin a discussion on the modern nation state system. It is considered as the most fundamental document as far as the nation states are concerned. So it came at the end of 30 years of war, and this model actually took complete control of the international system from 16th century to 19th century. I will come back to the features of Treaty of Westphalia, Westphalia, and what were the two most important and crucial points of Treaty of Westphalia, which actually which is actually why it is very, very significant. So in Westphalia model, what we see is it actually recognized the sovereignty of the territorial state along with lawmaking powers and settlement of disputes, right? So, sovereignty as a political question, I mean, the ability of the states or the rights of the states to decide their own in both internal and external matters when we try to define sovereignty. I mean, so Treaty of Westphalia for the first time recognized the sovereign power of a nation state. States are sovereign, they are supreme both in their internal and external affairs. Second, all states are equal before the eyes of the law. I mean, before international laws, all states are equal. Legal rules did not take into account the asymmetry of power. So legal rules means all kinds of legal issues, they were very, very important, and they did not bother about the asymmetrical power relationship which existed between the nation state system. So two rules became prominent: immunity from jurisdiction, which means that no state can be sued in the court of another state for the acts performed in its sovereign capacity. This is number one. That means no state can be sued, right? And second, which is very popularly known as, I mean, we also call it as diplomatic immunities. Immunity from the state agency, which means that if an individual breaks any law of the country while acting as an agent of the country in an official capacity, he cannot be held guilty. We can also add C, right? So they cannot be held as guilty. They have to be sent back to many of the nation states. They send back some of the people who they accuse that they have violated the rules of the land. That's why. So this is very, very important. So the internal and external conditions helped in consolidation of the nation state system. So, however, the nation state process was gradual, and many nation states imitated others in the nation building process. So the nation state process was gradual, which I have already told in the beginning of the class. And so many of the nation states actually imitated others in the nation building process. So population, which in spite of being ruled by foreign powers, had one way or another acquired a sense of themselves as nations without state, and in some cases state building preceded nation building. So this is very, very important, which I have already told you in the beginning. That's why I said I will try to explain you when I will come to the slides. Nations without state, what are the examples? For example, Palestine. People in Palestine believe that Palestine is a state, but unfortunately nobody has, the United Nations or any of the major powers, they have not recognized Palestine as a state. So Palestine can at best be considered as a nation. Similarly, nations without state. So I have already given examples of nations without state. Similarly, states also without nations. So state is a legal concept. For example, India is a state. But the moment I say India as a nation, that means all people living throughout India, they must agree that India is a country which binds together, which evokes some kind of emotions within themselves, and that's why they belong to the motherland. That kind of temperament, that kind of understanding will make us to believe that states cannot exist without nations, but hardly we find this kind of examples. This is why it is very important. So then the next thing is that there is a famous scientist, social scientist, Gianfranco Poggi, divided the formation of the state into 3 stages in European state system. I have already told you, I am trying to summarize what I have told you is the consolidation of the rule. So this mainly actually referred to the western part of the Europe. This stage saw the rise of a powerful center by establishing superiority over others through the war-making mechanism, thereby establishing control and unifying it into a single territory. So this is very, very important, number one point. The second is rationalization of rule. This stage refers to the growth of some selected and empowered functionaries forming hierarchically structured units. So this hierarchical structure included trained personnel such as bureaucracy. That means this is the second stage where bureaucracy was thought that it is important. And then the final one is expansion of rule. So this stage refers to the functional sphere of the state, thereby catering to the needs of the society. So with growing economic modernization and social needs, this function necessitated the growth of specialized administrative units. So this is very, very important. Then expansion of rule was actually used by the European powers to extend their territory to other parts of the world. For example, Spain, Portugal, France, Britain as some of the glaring examples of how they tried to use the expansion of rule principle by the European powers to expand their territory. So for example, Britain, they just came to have trade with India, but ultimately they stayed here. So this kind of nuisances they can create sometimes. So these states reaped the fruits of discovery and exploitation on the non-European lands, which was also aided by new modes of communication, right? So, I mean, the states which never participated in war, but they were actually reaping the fruits of discovery and exploitation on the non-European lands, right? So non-European lands was an experimenting land, and Europe was hugely successful in these kind of things. So that is facilitated a new mechanism of political control over the colonies. Why? It is a new mechanism of political control because you submit everything, all public documents to the government in the name of any specific disasters. So the government can take away everything that you own. So that's government's decision. So it's a political control over the colonies. So I would say that this present crisis actually it's a crisis situation for the colonial system and the state system itself. So how to tackle these kind of things? So that was very, very important. And then finally, when we try to understand some of the concluding points is that if it facilitated a new form of control over these new territories, I mean, whatever territories we have acquired, we try to form new control. And second, the rise of anti-colonial sentiments became very, very responsible for the emergence of new nation states. So anti-colonial nation states, they were sentiments, they were very, very important. And then finally, this is how the modern nation state became the principal form of political rule across the globe, along with a modern form of government. So what we are trying essentially here to suggest is that the European nation state system did not emerge overnight. It was a period of intense battle of ideas. It was a period of intense battle of strength. It was a period of intense battle of, I would say, muscle power. So everything you can exercise. But somehow, fortunately, we became more ordered and we realized that human beings can be protected by individuals themselves. That's why it is very, very important. So when we try to understand the idea of the European state system, we can safely say that European state system actually was very, very adaptive in nature, and because they were adaptive in nature, they could manage to adapt to the changing circumstances. So that's why this kind of intervention is very, very necessary. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation here, and maybe we can have a couple of questions which you would like to on this topic, I would like to share this video link to all of you to read this, and then we will move over to the other important chapters in your syllabus. Thank you very much.